Probably one of the best use cases for AI or using an LLM in education, especially if you are a teacher, a lesson planner, a curriculum designer, or whatever. We're going to create a scope and sequence or a curriculum map or whatever you want to call it using ChatGPT. And there's a specific way that you can do this to make it really robust. I'm going to paste a prompt that I already typed out. It's saying, help me build a high school physics scope and sequence, blah, blah, blah. You want to tell it the division, so units, chapters, lessons, in that order from largest to smallest. The big thing here is to be very, very specific. So if you have it as an NGSS-based course, we want to include the performance expectations, the DCIs, the science and engineering practices, cross-cutting concepts, all that stuff. And tell it what you expect to do in the future, too, because you're going to build this iteratively. There is often a limit of tokens or words, so you don't want to, it's not going to just give you everything in perfect format. So building it step by step is going to give you the best results. And of course, I want it in a table. Let's see what it does. So as of right now, I'm just having it create a list of units that are logical and why or what they are going to be in that order. So you have an introduction to physics, kinematics, forces and Newton's laws, energy and work, standard things that are going to go into a high school physics course. Now, if you don't agree with anything on here, or if you want to change it, you can always do that. Obviously, this is a suggestion. So it's giving me 2 bonus units saying, oh, thermodynamics, fluid mechanics. Now, this is smart because this is exactly what I would say would be a bonus unit. If you're doing a first year physics course, for example, these are things that are going to come last because they're a little bit more complex. So they don't have to come last. But again, this is just an idea. So let's say you think this is great, right? You're going to copy and paste this. So we're going to copy, paste, boom. Now, of course, you can adjust these, have your wrapping. So let's turn the text wrapping on. Let's make these larger, but not that large. Hold on. All right. So this is a really great start. Now, remember, we said, and I can add the headers later, I didn't copy those in. We said that we want to also include the lessons. So it can get overworked. Now, I think this would actually do a really good job of adding the lessons in this table. So I'm like, expand the table by 1 column, which will include the lessons for that unit. Include no more than, I should say chapters, because that is actually what I said for the breakdown. Chapters for that unit include no more than 3, let's say 5 chapters per unit. Boom. Now, what it's going to do is going to expand that table and add those chapters in. Now, you're going to look at this, and I'm looking at this, I know the physics, I'm like, okay, yeah, conversion factors, vectors, graphing, motion, Newton's laws, like all of this makes sense. If ever you look at something and you're like, this doesn't make sense, or I wouldn't do it this way, obviously change it. But from what I can see, this is a very strong start. And again, this is supposed to get you started and save you time, not to like necessarily do everything for you, because you're going to have to go through and be like, oh, I wouldn't put this in that course. And of course, I said up to 5 or no more than 5. You can make changes like this is too many, too few, whatever you want to do. As it's finishing up with the chapters, then we're going to move on to the lessons. So I'm going to say, okay, add yet another column to the right to break those chapters into lessons. Let's see what it says. So now it says units, unit title, chapters, lessons. We're building this table step by step. Don't be afraid to talk to it and ask it to update things. So I'm noticing that I think it would be better if the numbering system were like unit.chapter.lesson. So I'm saying, hey, update the table. So for example, where is it? Solving projectile problems would be like solving projectile motion problems would be like 2 because it's unit 2. Since it's like chapter 4 and it'd be the second lesson in chapter 4, it'd be 2.4.2. Now it's going to do this. So it knows this numbering system. It's very logical. And what we're looking for here is on the lessons section, the updated numbering system. So far it's looking good. 1.1.1, 1.1.2, all the way over. Really useful you can do is to ask it to double check its work to remind it of things. So double check your work to ensure that these make sense in terms of order and balance for hitting NGS standards and the general flow of a physics course. Also, remember that a unit or chapter doesn't necessarily need to have 5. You can justify 3 or 4, do so. Don't change what you don't need to, but take the time to review what you did. So I know it's a little bit creepy. You're talking to it kind of like a person, but that's a tool. It thinks, so to speak, in that kind of way. So let's see what it does. It's thinking, it's reviewing. I reviewed the structure, keeping in mind, blah, blah, blah. Here are adjustments and justifications to ensure both balance and whatever. So it's doing some adjustments. No need for changes, all foundational whatevers. So it's thinking about the kinematics unit. It's like, let's reduce this to 4. Motion, graphing, 1-dimensional, 2-dimensional. Then it provides even a justification. Merging projectile motion with 2-dimensional motion ensures smooth introduction of vectors while covering basic kinematics comprehensively. So, it's going through, it's making those changes, it's making those adjustments, and thinking through it logically. And you can accept or reject whatever you want. example of that. In the modern physics, it decides, let's just reduce the chapters, rename them, reorganize them, and it's saying keeping these three major themes gives a solid introduction to modern physics without overwhelming students in an intro course. Now, originally, it had photoelectric effect and stuff like that. I actually agree with this change. If I wanted to teach the photoelectric effect, I could do that. I could introduce it, but it's not something where I'm like, I feel like I'd have to get to it. Or if I were creating this draft to present to someone, I'm like, you don't have to do it. There's so much to cover. There's so much depth already. I think this justification is smart. And of course, as a human, I can decide to keep or reject its suggestion. But this did provide some good justification. And again, there's some other things here. So that's an example of how you can kind of talk with it and have it check its own work and reason with it. Keep in mind that these do work on tokens and words, so you want to make sure you don't overwhelm it. So now I'm saying now we'll work unit by unit to build the details. Add a column. I'll just say add columns. Add columns to the right as needed for the unit row we're focusing on at the time. We'll start by adding two columns to units 1 and 2, one for DCIs and one for PEs. Include the description verbatim from NGSS. Ideally, it's going to create a table of just units 1 and 2 that I can copy with the DCIs and the PEs. Now, if it's a long table, then I'll give you the option to scroll. I'm using one screen split in half, as you can see. So right now I'm looking through this, and this is where you're really going to want to put a little bit stronger eyes on this. I don't like the quotations, so I definitely would tell it to not do that. So I'm going to say it right here. Don't include quotation marks, because that's just it's just weird. So I'll say don't include quotation marks, though. Try that again. It's like, okay, sure, gotcha, no quotation marks. And the quotation marks are gone. Do not ever take as pure fact what an LLM or an AI like this gives you. You must default to RI, which is real intelligence. And you're like, yeah, that looks good, that doesn't look good. Again, if you're ever in doubt, you can always ask it to justify or to double check itself. That's a really, really strong strategy when it comes to using this as a tool. And what I do, you can just keep adding sheets here to keep moving along, and then that way you'll have other iterations or other versions of it, so you can always go back and be like, oh, I liked what it did that time, but not necessarily this time, or I would change the name of this. You don't have to keep overwriting your work. That's the beauty of using Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel. You can have the AI check its own work and remind it of what was done and what is to come. That is always really key to making it a useful output. So what I said here is now back to units 1 and 2, add relevant SCPs and CCCs with 2 additional columns. Keep in mind that you should include all relevant DCIs and PEs for the chapter or lesson, so double check and add if you need. And that will help you think of the appropriate SCPs and CCCs for each as well. If more than one applies, include it. We'll do 2 units at a time, like last time. So it's going to give us units 1 and 2 with the double check. It says, I reviewed to ensure accuracy, blah, blah, blah. And notice how we are building this thing. This is amazing. So it's going to give us the DCIs, the PEs, the science and engineering practices, or the SCPs, and the CCCs, the cross-cutting concepts. And it is looking, and there are a bunch of these already cross-mapped over on the internet. If you want to provide it with additional context, if you have some special document like your own state standards that you would also like to align in, say, another column, you can do that. Be like, these are the Texas standards, these are the Virginia standards, these are the whatever standards. Add those in another column and make sure that the content matches up, etc. I zoomed out so that it could be easier to see, at least for me on this screen, probably not for you. But what I said here was, now we need to make big ideas for each lesson. Instead of recreating each row with all those details, you already have blah, 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 blah. So if we look at what this says, I was basically being very explicit and saying, I want all of those lesson codes that we created earlier, like 3.1.1, 3.1.2, whatever, all those to be in one column, and then the other column will have those big ideas for each. Now, I want to make this easier on myself, so I'm telling it, just give me it for all of the units at once, and then it will paste them. Or I can just paste them in this column for the big ideas. So let's see what happens. And I did tell it, if you don't know what I'm talking about, ask first. So I gave it a screenshot of what I've been working on, so it's asking, okay, I understand your request. You'd like a table where each row contains lesson codes. Okay, perfect. Okay, so here's what I would change. Every big idea, I want it on a new line within that cell. So I'm going to say that. So this is just a jumble of all the big ideas, but now it's separating them out in lines. I don't necessarily think these are the best big ideas. I would probably want to provide it with some examples of good big ideas. Some of these are okay, and this is definitely where you probably would want to dive in and just do a lot of this manually, just to make it seem a little bit better. So like, for example, this just says graphs help visualize motion. I would definitely beef that up. okay, this is better. So that graphing motion one was like visualizing motion through graphs helps us interpret real world scenarios. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Maybe that's not exactly right, but again, this is the starting point. I had and told it to put the matching lesson code at the beginning of each big idea because that's going to really help delineate which one is which. So again, just talk to it and tell it what changes you'd like. It made a bit of a mistake. I asked it for the Common Core State Standard math codes, and it gave me the SCPs. So I'm like, these look like the SCPs. I gave it examples of what those Common Core math codes actually look like, and it should fix it. It'll be like, you're right, something like that. Another last key trick. If you think that all the work you just did is something you're going to want to do again for a different subject or whatever, tell it to tell you what to tell it. So I'm saying, think about all the work we did, blah, 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 blah. I want to do the exact same thing for chemistry. So provide a detailed and ordered list of prompts that would help someone have you help build whatever for a different course. And then I even said, think about the confusions you had and think about prompts that will help you avoid those confusions in the future effectively. So I even gave an example of the fixed curriculum map that I was like, this is pretty much the standard format that I want going forward. So it's like to help someone build one in chemistry, for example, with all the details we have, I told it to give me all the prompts. I'll end on this. The point of this tool is not to do everything for you, but it does a lot for you. You've still got to go through thing by thing as the human subject matter expert or instructional expert or whatever your role is to fix it, to humanize it, to make the changes that make it fit your exact needs. But this saves you so much time, even down to looking things up and having all those tabs open. I had this just with 2 tabs open, and I can open up a few more tabs, get this probably to the point I want it to be in about another hour or two, and it doesn't take me 3 days like it would normally do.